Hello everybody, I hope everybody is wide awake in this first talk of the day. I have to introduce now Walter Heck from Data, is the technical director, and his sidekick Oliver Lowe for today's first talk, which is monitoring and, and alerting for logs. And I guess we start now, so have fun.
Good morning, everyone. Who's drunk? Nobody? No? That's pretty decent. So, good morning. We are here, Oliver and myself. We are going to talk to you a little bit about monitoring your logs. Bernd showed it yesterday in the roadmap. I wasn't there because I was working on slides, but Bernd showed yesterday a quick demo as far as I understood, and today we'll dive a little bit more in depth on what this feature is and how we can use it. First off, my name is Walter and this is Oliver, and we work for a company called Data. The stuff that we'll be talking about, we'll discuss a little bit about what is exactly Elasticsearch, Logstash, FileBeat, and how do they fit together. And then we'll dive in mostly on the specifically the Logstash output for Isinga. So we'll talk a little bit about how do these outputs work, and why would I want to hook it up to Isinga. And then we'll show you a little bit of an example of the things you can do, and Oliver will do a live demo. So it should be good. So first up, Elastic. Who here is not using any kind of centralized logging? You should not be here. You should go and set up centralized logging. All right. Coincidental. But yeah, so in a place where you're doing monitoring, which should be a first-class citizen in a modern infrastructure, just as well, centralized logging should also be a first-class citizen. It's more important than ever to be able to see exactly what is going on and to do things like root cause analysis and just a whole bunch of other stuff. Elasticsearch is the official product name. Elastic is the company, and then they created this stack called the Elastic Stack. So it's been a bit of a confusing naming thing, but Elasticsearch is basically it's a full-text search engine. It's open source. It has a enterprise backing from Elastic. So if you want to buy support, if that makes your bosses feel better, then you can totally do that. It is used for a whole bunch of things, and one of them is centralized logging. So actually, it's a full-text search engine based on a technology called Lucene. And yeah, in the sysadmin operations field, it's used usually for centralized logging. But you could just as well use it to power search for a website. Yeah, as I said, centralized logging should be a first-class citizen, so you can have correlation between your logs and your monitoring data. Now, to get data, Elasticsearch is basically used as a storage engine. So all we do is send text to it, and Elasticsearch will index it for us and store it so that we can later search through it. But that's basically all that Elasticsearch is. Now, how do we get our data into Elasticsearch? One of the ways that Elastic provides us is a little daemon called FileBeat. FileBeat runs on each server that you want to monitor logs from, and basically it just tails a bunch of files in a fancy way and sends the events that it picks up to a defined output. So here we have, for instance, a prospector. That's the unit for things that you want to monitor. So this prospector monitors var log backup.log, and whenever new lines appear in it, it'll send those lines to to the Logstash output. You can do some kind of some basic processing already on the FileBeat end, but in my personal opinion, it's best to do to make sure that FileBeat understands individual events and then send them off to Logstash for processing. That means that most log files are just single lines. But for instance, if you're running any Java apps, you have these beautiful stack traces that are 200 lines of garbage that nobody wants to look at. But those 200 lines of stack trace, they are actually one log event, so to speak. So FileBeat also supports multi-line log formats. So you can do a little bit of a pre-processing on the server itself. The majority, however, you want to do on the Logstash end. So Logstash is a daemon. It's quite heavy. Runs in a JVM. It takes events from inputs, then filters them, and then sends those events to outputs. It can be one or more inputs. The filters can be as many as you want. A decent Logstash setup will have easily dozens, if not hundreds, of filters present. And then the number of outputs can be one or more, whatever you so desire. We'll see that with the Isinga output, the way it's currently built, you'll easily end up with multiple outputs for Isinga alone. And basically what Logstash does is it takes whatever is coming in as events, then pulls them through some kind of filter that can correct fields, discard some data, add some data, a whole bunch of different things, and then sends them to outputs. What makes Logstash so powerful is the fact that it works with plugins, and they're fairly simple. There are dozens and dozens available, and they are both they are working on all three levels. So you have input plugins, filters, and output plugins, and that makes it really quite nice. So some example input plugins are, for instance, FileBeat. You can read data from AWS CloudWatch if you want to. Very common is a TCP and a syslog input. You can even do UDP. There are probably about 20 or 30 of them. So if you want to see all of them, take a look at the Elastic website. Filter plugins, they manipulate data, so this can be anything from, there's a JSON filter, which we'll see a little bit later, which basically takes an event that was JSON and then splits it up into fields that are the actual fields defined in the JSON message. GUIP can look up the location of an IP address and add that as a field. So if you have, for instance, your Apache logs that have the source IP addresses of each request, then GUIP can add the actual geolocation data to it. Grok is quite nice. Grok allows you to specify basically a regular expression. It's a bit more fancy, but basically a regular expression of what a message consists of, and then if it matches that regular expression, it will be cut up into the specific fields. This is very useful for instance, syslog messages. That there are many different kinds of messages that could be sitting in a syslog, that be entering a syslog, but you'll usually have at least a handful of patterns that are matching. So, for instance, let's say that you have PAM messages. They usually have a specific format. However, it is free text, so. It's text based out of with a specific format, and then in a Grok filter you can say, okay, the first word of the message is the daemon that sent the message. Then the second part is the actual message. The third part is an IP address, etc., etc. Hey, I listed JSON twice. There's also a Ruby filter plugin, which you'll see later. I think it's very, very ugly, but we abused it for this demo because it was quick and simple. But I wouldn't actually recommend doing that in a production level setup, because you have to realize that if a message hits a filter, every message that hits that filter will go through the processing. So you need to be a bit careful about how you're actually determining which filter to use. And then output plugins. Where do I send data? You can send to a whole bunch of different things: CloudWatch, Datadog, Elasticsearch, StatsD. Fairly common in the ELK stack is to have a Elasticsearch output. And today we'll show the Icinga output as well. So the Logstash Icinga output came earlier this year. I requested it at the same time that it was just built, so probably certain minds worked in the same way and thought, hey, wouldn't it be nice if? So basically, what it allows us to do is do things in Icinga through the API based on messages that are coming into Logstash. There are a number of actions that we can take, but before we go there, so this is what it will look like. So we have each server in our network runs FileBeat, IcingaBeat, whatever other ways to gather data. It ships those logs to Logstash. Logstash filters and processes the events and sends them based on filters. It sends them to, filters is the wrong word, but based on conditionals, it sends them to Icinga if there's, for instance, a problem, or it sends them to Elasticsearch for simple storage. Generally, you want to send almost every message to Elasticsearch and only few to Icinga. So the Icinga should only receive the messages that are actually relevant to it, and that's done with the conditionals on the Logstash level, which you'll see in the demo a little bit later. Where could we use this? One of the scenarios is, for instance, monitoring a backup, which is what Oliver will show you, where the moment the message is received that a backup has started. So your backup script can output a message to syslog saying backup has started, and on the Logstash level, you catch that message and send a downtime to Icinga to set that host to not alert for the duration of the backup. Other use cases that we discussed are a big use case is devices that we don't have the ability to install monitoring on, but they do have the ability to send messages to syslog. For instance, switches and all that kind of stuff. Printers, they can send their messages to syslog, but we cannot actually install an Icinga agent on them. So allowing or picking up the events from Logstash is an interesting way to do this. The demo that we'll be giving later, this is a bit of a lost message here, but I didn't really have a better way to put it. There is a Icinga Vagrant project that has a bunch of Vagrant boxes that set up simple Icinga scenarios for you, and we used the Icinga 2x Elastic Vagrant box for it. It sets up by default already a FileBeat and an Elasticsearch as well as an Icinga server, and I just put in a merge request for adding Logstash to that as well because I needed to do that anyway. So actions we can take from the outputs. Maybe we look at a output first. Yeah. So here is what it looks like. A Logstash configuration has a input section, a filter, section and an output section. And as you see here, our input is file beat, or is the beat. We're running on port 5044, so this makes Logstash listen on port 5044. All the messages that come in will be run through these filters, and this is what I said, that you have to be careful that you shield off the filters that will actually be run with the correct conditionals. So it means that this mutate will only run if there's a field called syslog severity and it's set to the value error. In a production Logstash setup, you want to make sure that you think carefully about the order of in which you set your filters, because it can make a big impact on how fast Logstash can process events. We have here a sample filter or a conditional saying if the source of the message is actually var log my precious log.json, then filter the message field in the event that came in with the JSON filter, which basically cuts up all of the JSON fields into fields. And then the meat, of course, is here in the output. Standard out. This is not something I would recommend in a production setup, because you will pipe all of your messages to standard out. But it's really great if you're trying to figure out what the hell is happening and what is arriving in Logstash. We have here a very simple Elasticsearch output that just sends every message that comes in to the Elasticsearch daemon that's running locally. And then here we have our Isinga output, which is what we're here for. We set a host, a username and a password. We don't care about any security, of course, so we just turn off SSL verification. And then here we have the action to take. In this case, we're processing a check result, and then we have one or more fields that determine the parameters to the action that we want to take. And basically, and then here we have the host and the service that we want to work with. So basically, this is the basis for our API call that gets sent to this Isinga host. The only thing is that here this kind of syntax determines the field that comes from the message that is coming into Logstash. So if the Logstash message has a exit status field in it, then that will be used as the parameter to process check result. This is obviously not a production level setup neither, because this will mean, because we don't have an if statement like one of these in front of the output, the Isinga output, this will mean that every single message that comes into Logstash will be sent to Isinga API, which will not make anyone happy. Let's look a little bit about to the different actions, which is here. First one is process a check result. You can just manipulate the state of check. Some examples are, for instance, a dummy catch-all service that just has an output defined for it, that if we see the word error in a message, we send we change the state of that check to critical, so you can go and investigate. Hey, I found some kind of error message in the logs, and then as you go along and you identify the sources of those error messages, you can exclude them in your Logstash configuration from actually raising this this output, and that way you can start finding errors that you would maybe otherwise not find. A backup service which can go to an OK status after you finish a backup. You can, at the start of the backup, we were discussing it yesterday, you can either set it to critical and put a downtime on the host so that it doesn't actually raise an alert, or you can set it to unknown, because you don't at that moment you don't want to raise an alert yet, but the downtime of the host needs a final time. So you have a downtime that you set at the start of your backup of, let's say, 2 hours, and then if after 2 hours the downtime finishes but the backup hasn't finished for whatever reason, you will receive an alert saying, hey, we still have a problem because that backup hasn't sent the OK that it was finished. Send a custom notification, fairly straightforward, just requires an author and a comment. You can force it, but that would probably not make too many people happy unless it's a really, 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 really important message. Fairly straightforward. Adding and removing a comment is interesting. It adds a comment to either a service or a host. The issue is that removing the comment is normally done with the identifier that is returned by the API call that adds the comment. However, we don't have access to that because the Logstash is stateless, so it doesn't know what identifier the comment was added with. So the only thing we can do is remove all comments by that author from that service. So it works a bit weird. I wouldn't personally remove comments automatically from a monitoring system. So I'd probably just go and only use it for adding comments. Similarly, we have schedule and remove downtime, where we can add and remove a downtime. So as you see here, you have to set, so these are required. The start time and end time are required. So that's a bit not necessarily always the way you want to do it. I would say that if you're starting a backup, you want to be able to set a downtime that has no end time, and it will be removed the moment your backup is finished. These are all straightforward mappings to the Isinga API calls, so there isn't really any magic going on there. Right now, you have to download the gem directly, or is it already? Is anyone here that? So it's being added to. Is that already done? Oh yeah. Okay. So you can already do a Logstash plugin install without first downloading the gem. If you're doing this, if you happen to be doing this, it would be because you want to do the latest of the latest, or you have another reason to do to download the gem and then install it manually. Be aware that if you do this in a VM, this can take a very, very long time. Installing the Logstash output, Isinga thing can take a very, very long time. This is not apparently a problem of this gem specifically. It has something to do with entropy on a virtual machine being low and Logstash going all crazy over that. So I've seen it take easily 15 minutes for a gem that is 120K in size. In order to use our Isinga output, we need, at the minimum, an API user. Obviously, you would set the permissions a bit more restrictive based on what it is you want the actual API user to be able to do. In our case, where we want to do a backup, we just create a backup service that doesn't really do anything, so we can manipulate its state from the API. This we already looked at, which means it's demo time, which means I'll pass it on to Oliver.
Hey, hi. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's good. Before I was like looking at it. Yeah. Okay, so let me get my list of things to do. So the first thing we want to do is look at configuring FileBeat on the server. So go here and we look at JSON log. So what we know is that we know that our particular script outputs to var log mylog.json, because everybody logs in JSON, of course. Easy to decode. So that's pretty straightforward. Basically, we just say the path, and then filebeat goes and schedules to send it off to Logstash. Pretty straightforward. The next thing though is more interesting with Logstash. So if we go to filter, so we start by saying, okay, my JSON log is the one we specified in filebeat. We say, okay, the source is just the entire message. We start looking through the actual output of the log. So first we need to do something like set the syntax so we can read it more easily. That didn't work. Set. Oh, yeah. Oh, highlight? What is it? Yeah, whatever. Okay, so so what we do is we need to do some clever things like say, okay, what's the type of thing that we're looking for and what are the actions that we want to take on it. So the first thing we want to do is we see, oh, okay, it has a backup started in the message. So we set the start time and the end time of the particular thing. We want to schedule downtime. So we say, okay, the start time is now, and then the end time is going to be 7,200 seconds, which is 2 hours. From there, we set the exit status. And we set it to 3 because we say, okay, the backup's starting. We don't actually know how it's really going. It's not okay because we don't really necessarily know that because it hasn't finished. We don't want it warning because what's the problem? We can't set it to critical because, well, nothing is wrong per se, it's just running. So we set it to unknown. When the backup's finished, we want to set the exit status to 0. So the script is going to say, oh, my backup is finished. So we say, okay, cool, looks good, let's set it to OK. Next thing we do is actually, let's have a look at the script that we're running. So this is, for example, some script that some DBA wrote. So, which I guess I should say a nice thing about this Logstash sort of workflow is that, say for example, you have a DBA and they've written this thing, and you can't, go and change their workflow to make it nice and easy to, say, check the status of their particular database stuff. So instead of having to go into their code or, do all this stuff, you can just say, okay, well, I know they're logging in a certain way, and I can just filter the logs instead of, say, testing the application database directly because I don't have permissions and all this stuff. All you need is just to be able to read the log file. Anyway, so this is our script. It just outputs to the file that we know that we're going to be checking. That's filebeat's configured to look at this file. And yeah, that's it. Okay, so let's run our backup and see how this thing works. So let me just check that I've got Ichinga up. Whoops. Yeah. Okay, cool. Oh, sorry, one final thing we need to do is, I'll just show you why. Logstash 22. Yeah, this is the one. Okay, so this is what I was saying before. We set the downtime in the unknown status. So we're doing this boring stuff, setting, which Ichinga host we're going to send our downtime to and all that. We know we're going to be doing our SQL host. The service that we're going to set the status of or set the downtime of is backup. We have this start underscore time, so this is where I set it in the Logstash filter. End time is the same as before. And as Walter was saying, these are just the standard API things, so no magic. Where else are we going? The other thing we want to do is set the downtime, but also set the status of the service. So we don't just want to set the downtime and just let the status be whatever it was. We need to say, okay, the status of our backup service is exit status. So this dynamically sets to the thing that I set in the Logstash filter. So I said the exit status was 3. So it will grab that variable from this % thing is the field. The message is just the whole log line, actually. The other thing we want to do is when we find these things, also just set the status to OK. Again, we use a dynamic field variable thingy. And then we also remove the downtime because we know, well, when the backup is finished, the downtime is actually over. So instead of just waiting for the downtime to finish and maybe something else happens to this particular service, you can just dynamically remove the downtime whenever the backup is truly finished. So let me make a service in Ichinga that's going to do this, .conf. Okay, so usual stuff. Backup. We use a dummy because someone else is actually setting the stuff. This is an interesting thing you can do, is you can say this thing, I can't remember now, what is it? What is it? Yeah, okay. I can't remember now, yeah. Dummy underscore state. Set it default to unknown. We just say the default message, backup activity, and then just assign it to our backup, well, our database server. Yep. Cool. Okay, so let's get our service in Ichinga. And now hopefully it doesn't do this weird caching thing, which maybe it does. C1. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know why it does this sometimes. Is there something I can do to like make it show more quickly? Or is this like a feature of the... I don't know, I find that. Yeah, I know. But yeah, this is the same thing I had before when I was testing it. It took ages to actually show up. Are there any Ichinga experts in the room? Yeah. Well, I find this with the Ichinga web, yeah, it's... I don't know. No, I think it's using the SQL backend. MySQL, yeah.
No, it's using these dynamic hosts, maybe that's something like that. Because everything is randomly generated. Because that's in the bacon box.
Oh, okay. Maybe. Well, so you think it takes longer to get the service or something? Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. But even then, I was finding it on site last week, like that I would add things, and the daemon would restart and all that sort of thing. I don't know what the. Anyway, maybe we can. What do you think? We can look at another example or something.
Yeah, so you can show that the run script actually shows up in Kibana.
Oh yeah. Oh, exactly. Yeah. Okay. So let's actually run our script. Okay, so FileBeat will collect the log because it's outputting to this JSON log file. So we go into Kibana, and what time is it? 10:04. Cool, there we go. So this is from a log file. Oh, backup started. Okay, cool. So exit status is 3 because we don't know what the state of the backup is yet. We've got our message, and this is our special thing to set the status. And then man, I don't know why that's not. Any other ideas? You can shout out. No? Yeah. Yeah. No ideas?
You really stop and really start.
Oh, yeah, okay. Oh, actually, why don't I just do that? Yeah, well, it's not difficult. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, no, it's only, I'm pretty sure it's the right one. Let's see. Ooh. 150, yeah, okay. I don't know why it's not a... Oh, hold on. Maybe it's this thing. Yeah, the Chinga daemon is dead, but it's speaking over the IDO, over the network. Maybe can I kill this guy? I'm running for 4 minutes. Oh, this sucks. Okay, well... Yeah, I'll restart it again, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, whoops. Started. Okay. Maybe something to do with the time. Time on our VM is wrong.
Yeah, now there's 6 services.
Oh, nice. Okay, cool. We're on the go, fellas. Okay. So, backup finished. Nice. Okay, let's run that again. Let's see this. So.
It's actually interesting. So the backup was finished. So the issue here is that when Oliver ran it the first time, the message came through Logstash. Logstash saw that it needed to send its output to both Elasticsearch and Isinga. It sent it to Elasticsearch successfully, and most likely in the logs we will see that the API call that sent it to Isinga was not successful, but it doesn't mean that Logstash doesn't consider the message as processed. So if Isinga is for some reason not up and running, or there's some other issue, your alert will not be raised because it's the API call gets sent, and regardless of whether that API call succeeds or fails, the message is considered handled.
Yeah. So here we go. Backup of checkpoint Jenny is finished now. So you see how it did the downtime, set the status, and now when it finishes, just have a look at the log that it writes. So here it started it, set the downtime, finished, set the status OK, remove the downtime. That's pretty much it, I guess.
Look at the history of the service.
Oh yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah. Yeah. So here we go, and it has it has a little bit of like auditing history, so it knows that Logstash did it. Yeah, I mean. I guess that's it really. It's a pretty simple thing. I think the use cases, we were trying to think of stuff, and it really helps when you have these really locked down like devices. Say you've got some, telephone modem at home or something. That thing can write to syslog. So if you can write a Logstash filter that does it, and then correspondingly sets the check process result then you can get stuff that you thought would be really hard to monitor because you can't even send any data to it. As long as that thing can send output through the syslog, send it to some daemon somewhere in the network, then you can do nice monitoring. And it doesn't have to be these passive checks that are sort of, you can't really trust them, because you can set the service state in advance. So it means that I guess this is this nice thing about, green really means green, right? So you can be rest assured that if it's okay, the only time it can ever go okay is if it's gotten this certain log message from your modem or something, whatever your lockdown device is. So it's pretty simple, which is nice. It's very useful. You can use it pretty much straight away. I think I'm going to do it on I'll do it on Tuesday. I'm going to implement this thing now that we've got it working. I guess. Yeah, I don't know.
I have 2 more slides and then we'll mostly be done in
Do we need to show anything else?
No.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, where are my slides? So, up for improvement, obviously. One of the things is that you saw here a fairly simple use case, and you already saw 4 ISINGA outputs.
Yeah, we should show the file.
And actually, it doesn't even have to be. Oh, sorry. Can you show me
to do it? Yeah, sure.
So here we have 4 ISINGA outputs, and even that should possibly already be boiled back down to 3, because we actually have 2 exactly the same Logstash outputs. For those of you who are really awake. So you see that the process check result for for scheduling the downtime. So that one that you see at the bottom of the screen there is the one that we do when the backup starts. But if you scroll down a bit, you'll see that the other process check result is actually the same, because we get the exit status from the Logstash message, and so they are the same. So with different conditionals, we could actually reduce this to 3 outputs. However, logically, you would imagine that you should only ever have 1 output. The reason that you have currently the need for creating all these different outputs is that while you can set the action, the action config parameters cannot be dynamically retrieved from the Logstash message. So what you really want to be doing is in the Logstash in Logstash, where you receive the message and where you're filtering it, add the specific fields to the message that allow for the API call to have the right parameters. However, that's not currently possible, so this would be a great thing for a version 2. For version 2. And so if you make the action config fields dynamic, then that makes it much easier. The other thing is that, and that will go away if you have these the action more dynamic. Right now we specify the credentials for the API user in a bunch of places, and this could all be dynamic. Actually, the ISINGA host and the ISINGA service, these 2 already allow for dynamic processing. So you can actually take the host directly from the host field in the message that comes into Logstash, because that comes from a server, and Logstash knows about that. So we can easily use that as the value for the host, and the same thing goes for the service. We just set it statically here because of ease of understanding. Other than that, it works quite well. The use cases are still something that needs to be crystallized a little bit. Somebody mentioned SNMP traps would be an interesting use case. Some alternatives. So Elastic has the Watcher, which is a one of the components of what Elasticsearch calls, or Elastic the company, provides this thing called XPack, which is a commercial extension to Elasticsearch. And one of the things that are in there is Watcher, but you need to be aware that it operates on the Elasticsearch level. So you move your alerting to Elasticsearch, and in my opinion, it's better to do this on the Isinga side, because Isinga is already equipped with alerting strategies and all that kind of stuff. So there's no need to re-implement that on a different level. Splunk, which I have no experience with, no doubt also provides these kind of things. But then again, the processing happens on the data storage level instead of on the Logstash level. I wanted to say something else, but it slipped my mind. Obviously, we're hiring. If you happen to be interested in moving to the Netherlands, or you already live there, then you can join us. We are not the worst employer in the world. That's kind of my... Yeah, I know, huh? We bring our child to conferences, so... yeah, if you have any questions, Oliver at olendata.com, Walter at olendata.com. Pretty much anything at olendata.com happens to end up in my inbox, so if you want to tease me, you'll just send stuff to whatever address you think is appropriate at olendata.com. I'm on Twitter as well, and yeah, if you have any questions, get in touch. But I think now we still have some time for questions, so are there any questions at the moment? Are we still awake? Yeah? Yep. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay.
It seems like a lot of effort, all these filters and inputs and outputs and all that config. Is there a way of sharing that, distributing it? You know, I don't have to. Other people, you know, sticking them on GitHub, all those kind of things. Do you do that?
So the question is, it seems like a lot of effort to set up the filters and the outputs. Is there any way of sharing it? So not really, because the filters depend very much on what kind of logs you are having and what your specific monitoring scenarios are. So it's kind of the same thing as setting up your checks and your commands on an Isinga installation. You can have a bunch of default ones, but a lot of it is very custom. So what we showed here is very custom, depending on the backup script that somebody is creating. Depending on which messages are coming out of that backup script, you need to write your filters to actually activate on that specific message and that specific source, or whatever it is you determine the conditional part on. The output part is actually fairly straightforward. This seemed like a lot of configuration, but it's actually fairly straightforward. And there's a this is the GitHub repo, so github.com/isinga/logstash output Isinga, that has all the configuration in it, and so it's fairly simple actually. It might be a lot of letters in the early morning, but it's fairly simple when it all comes down to it.
So earlier you were talking about doing some processing on the file beat side before you send anything through. So I kind of have two questions. In some use cases, I've seen where they're reading a log file and they just want every single line passed through to Logstash and then sent on to wherever it needs to go. So what kind of throughput can we have there based on how many logs? I mean, is it going to at what point are you going to break it if reading so many logs? The other question is, how granular can you get with what you're sending through with the filtering on the agent side?
So the first question, yeah, how do you? Well, not personally, but I do know that it's fairly simple. As I said, Logstash is quite heavy, so depending on how much messages you send there, oh, video. Hi. Depending on how much messages you send it, you could end up with multiple Logstash daemons in a reasonably sized network. So a couple hundred hosts is going to easily cost you 1 or 2 Logstash servers, dedicated servers. So it is fairly heavy. People, for that reason, have started looking at other things than Logstash, but I find it personally quite nice and usable in smaller sized networks. And so one of your questions was, can I discard messages on the file beat level so they don't ever have to go to Logstash? Yes, that's possible. It's a file beat thing. So in file beat you have quite a bit of configuration options. I just like to keep the logic mostly on the Logstash level. But if you have messages that you never want to send through, then yes, it makes total sense to discard them at the file beat level. The other question was, what was your second?
Yeah, I guess on the agent side, what is it? I didn't really catch it in the presentation, but how does that filtering work? Is it regular expression, or is it
Which agent side? On the Logstash?
file beat side?
On the file beat side, so what we do is unfiltered. So the idea is that a file beat picks up on it's basically just tailing a log file in that simple config that we showed, where every single line that ends up in the message that it's prospecting, it prospects every 10 seconds, I think, by default, and then it just looks at which new lines are there and sends them over to Logstash. If you want to do some processing there already, that's possible, but in general, I like sending the entire message as a simple line, so it's FileBeat doesn't know that it's what kind of format it's made up of, if it's JSON or not, or if it's a Java stack trace. It doesn't know. It only knows that this is the unit of log event, so to speak, and that goes to Logstash, and then Logstash is the one that is responsible for cutting it up and making sense of it all and adding metadata to it if you want to, and then from there taking actions in the output. Any other questions?
Hello. I have 2 questions. The first is, how does Logstash know which downtime to delete after the job's done? Because maybe some administrator has had his own downtime set, and this is one. And the other thing is, can you show the service definition of the? I think it was a dummy session, dummy service. So that would be nice.
Okay.
Can you show the dummy service?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I'll just answer the first one first, I guess. So how do you? Oh, okay. Well, this is how you know which service or which host it's scheduling downtime for is set here. Yeah. So you're only setting this particular service to downtime. So if we have a look at Isinga, this is the history of the backup service, but if I were to look at, for example, this. Hello, there we go. Oh, that was our testing. Okay, so let's go to this. Yeah, so here there was no downtime set for that one. The service definition. So.
And to answer that question a little bit more, so
yeah, sure.
removing the downtime removes all downtimes by that author on that specific service. So if you have, but you shouldn't really have multiple downtimes active on the same service, on the same host, maybe.
Also being the API user.
Yeah,
no,
that's right.
Isn't it the author that we set in the...
No, that's only for comments.
No, look, there's an author there. The action config has an author. And
oh, sorry.
when you do the remove downtime, if you go down a little bit. Because then you actually specify the author as well.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, whoops.
Should make the author more dynamic to be more.
Yeah, so yeah. It's the same API problem because when you set a downtime, normally the API returns the ID identifier of the downtime that you just set, but the Logstash has no place to put that downtime identifier. So when you're removing it, it's just like, okay, I'll just remove everything from that specific author. And as Dave said, you can easily make the author a little bit dynamic and cheat your way out of it.
So this is our backup service. So the reason why we're doing a dummy one is because somebody else is setting the status, somebody else is setting the the comments and all this sort of thing. So it really can be anything. So I put some extra stuff here just to make it so that it's a little bit more makes some sense. But by default, it's set to OK. And it just says something like a check command was successful. So I guess in one way it's good, but then in another way, well, let's say it like this. Walter was talking about having a catch-all service. So for this particular thing, we could have many different Logstash outputs. Yeah. Is that the right? Yeah, outputs that so that track many different log files, but only set the status of this particular service. So what I am actually going to do on Tuesday is I'm setting up this exact thing in syslog, any error status, because I'm just getting to know the environment. So I can just have this big fat, apply service syslog errors or something, and any error that happens to come up in syslog on this particular server, then I just want it to tell me here.
The other thing that we realized yesterday is that there is actually a flag in the output, in the async output, that you can use to to dynamically create the service if it doesn't exist yet. However, that cannot remove the service at a given point in time, so you'll end up with services that get added and will stay there forever. I personally am a bigger fan of intentionally creating the service, but it probably depends a little bit on your use case. I like to not have to wonder where a service came from.
Actually, I just wanted to add one more thing to Dave's question. He asked about all the work that goes into actually, in the end, like for example, my demo, we just had setting the downtime and then making something go from unknown to OK again. I guess again we come back to this use case stuff. I'm imagining now for a customer that I'm at, there's this application that I'm just nowhere near being able to put agents on the servers and really start writing plugins for them because the people who write the application are in another country, and communicating with them is also really difficult because I don't even have an IM account because they can't seem to get around to making me one and all this sort of stuff. So right now, if I want to say, hey, look, I'm doing work and it is actually useful, then I can start learning about the application and seeing all the behaviors by doing Logstash. So instead of writing plugins, I can just start, filtering log messages. So I know what you mean though. There's a lot of like sort of stuff, but yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And again, it's very much as with the rest of monitoring. It's a setup once, benefit for a very long time kind of thing. So yes, it takes a bit of time to get the process right and figure out which outputs you need to use. But then it gets quite useful over time. I think we have time for 0 more questions. So nobody has a question? Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thanks.